Today, Dr. Mark Hyman shares his roadmap to a long, healthy life as he discusses his latest book, Young Forever. So let's hear it from him and find out what's going on with aging.
The dysfunctions that we see as normal aging, but are really abnormal aging, is not really new. We know that underlying all the chronic diseases of aging, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obviously, dementia, these are all related to disturbances in our ability to regulate our blood sugar, to what we call insulin resistance, where our body becomes resistant to the effects of insulin. And this creates this whole downstream cascade that is like a wildfire on the aging process. It causes you to gain belly fat. It drives up inflammation. It lowers your hormones. It increases cortisol, increases your stress hormones. It actually also causes abnormal cholesterol, fatty liver, all sorts of problems. Shrinks your hippocampus in your brain, fuels cancer cells. I mean, it is the nightmare if you want to be someone who's healthy and healthy for a long time. I mean, the idea basically is to have your lifespan, which is how long you're alive, be equal to your health span, which is how many years of your life you're healthy. And for most people, they're about 20 years short on the health span in their lifespan. People who had the ultra-processed food ate 500 calories more a day. That's basically the equivalent to gaining a pound a week or 52 pounds a year. So it's no wonder we're such an obese society, increasingly in the UK. I think the United States has you beat a little bit, but not by much. I think the reality is that this ultra-processed food is driving so much of the challenges we see in our society. For every 10% of your diet that's ultra-processed food, your risk of death goes up by 14%. And in America, 60% of our diet is ultra-processed food. In kids, it's almost 70% of their diet. This is just a deadly combination that not only causes long-term problems of, shorter lifespan, and we're seeing our life expectancy go down, but also immediate problems of all sorts of conditions that we now know are related to the starch and sugar, whether it's fatty liver in kids that need liver transplants or kids who are, having heart attacks at 20 years old because of this. I mean, it's really pretty frightening. Yeah, that's from the Global Burden of Disease study, huge study of 195 countries. 11 million people die every year from eating the wrong food. That's more than smoking or wars or anything else. It is the number one killer in the world today. The problems with our food policies and our food industry and how everything that we're doing is fostering the production, the growing, the production, the marketing, and the sale of these ultra-processed foods in ways we've never seen in human history. And that's really what's driving it. And I'm working hard on my nonprofit, the Food Fix campaign, to change those food policies to address, food marketing to kids, for example. And Boris Johnson, thankfully, he got wise once he got COVID, that food was related to his poor health, and that he understood that the reason he ended up in the ICU from COVID was because he was in poor metabolic health. And that was because of the starch and sugar and processed foods. And he then started to restrict marketing and other kinds of initiatives that actually were trying to lower the consumption of sugar and ultra processed food, which I think is great. But that needs to happen, globally. And in America, the effect of this is not just on aging, but is on everything. If you look at America, it's 4% of the world's population, but it was 16% of the COVID cases and deaths, which means we have a 400% increase compared to what we should have in terms of our population. Why is that? Because COVID hit a population that was pre-inflamed, that was metabolic and healthy, and that was at high risk for having complications and death from COVID. And that's why we're not, because we have a crappy healthcare system. We spend more than any other country by double, and yet we did the worst.
Yeah.
To more directly answer your question, which I indirectly answered about whose responsibility is it? Is it a personal responsibility that we need to just all eat less and exercise more? Or is there something else going on? And there's something else going on, which is that we are highly addicted to these foods. They're designed to hijack our brain chemistry, our hormones, our metabolism, and they do a very good job at that. And so we have to realize that there is some level of personal responsibility, but there's also the food environment and the food that's available and the compounds that are in the food that hijack our biology. So that I think is important to understand, to not blame the person who's overweight. That is one of the most, I think, damaging things that we do as a medical profession, as nutritionists, in our health policy. It's certainly the mantra of food companies, which is there's no good and bad calories. It's all about moderation. And if you want to sort of have Coca-Cola or Pepsi and it's part of your caloric intake, that's okay. And that's just a bunch of nonsense. As far as the foods that we think are okay that aren't okay, well, I think maybe we sort of don't understand when we see things like whole grains, that actually a lot of the whole grain foods out there are highly processed whole grains that are, put in Cheerios or Frosted Flakes. So we have, like new Frosted Flakes with extra, whole grains in them. It just is insane. I think we need to be very careful of food marketing and food labeling. If you want to have food, try to have it in its original form. Whole grains are actually that whole grains, and you can cook them yourself at home. And that's really important to not fall for these sort of marketing claims. I think also low fat is a terrible thing that we should be avoiding. I think a lot of low fat foods are high in sugar. And that was really the damaging message of the 90s with the food pyramid in America, where we were told to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta a day and cut our fat consumption. And we did that. And subsequently became the increasingly obese around the globe because of that advice that was really shared globally. So there's some really simple things like avoid low fat foods, eat good fats, and don't fall for false marketing labels where it says it's healthy for you if it's a processed food, or if it says high fiber, or if it has whole grain on it. These are ways in which the food industry uses sort of marketing on the front of package labeling to confuse people. And for example, Cheerios is a great example. That everything's Cheerios is a health food. It's oat bran, it's oat fiber, it's healthy, lower your cholesterol. It sounds good. But in fact, the glycemic index of Cheerios is worse than table sugar. So that is a problem. The glycemic index is 74 out of 100, table sugar 65. So I think we have to be very careful when we kind of eat these foods and how they impact our blood sugar. It's really important for us to understand that, how food affects our blood sugar, as we discussed at the outset of the podcast, is the most important determinant of our long-term health and well-being, including things like depression, fertility, acne, all sorts of problems that aren't just about heart attacks, strokes, cancer, dementia, and diabetes.
Yeah.
And I'm 63, so I'm interested in what's in it for me, because I don't want to age poorly. I want to be vibrant and do all the things I love to do, whether it's go skiing or gallop down the beach on a horse or go for a long bike ride or do whatever I want to do. I don't want to be limited. And I want to be able to enjoy life fully and travel and do all the things that really give me joy and make life meaningful. And to be able to show up and do the work I want to do in the world, and to be engaged and focused and healthy, to be able to actually show up for the people that matter in my relationships, to be in contribution. And so in order to do that, I have to be healthy. And so I'm very interested in the topic of how you stay healthy as we get older. But I also find, and by the way, biologically, according to new metrics that we can use to measure our biological age, I'm only 43. So I'm still pretty young. And the truth is, I wanted to focus on this topic of longevity science because, unlike other disciplines in medicine, this is a relatively new field of research. And because in the past, we thought there was nothing we can do about aging, that we actually just need to actually stop worrying about it and deal with the disease of aging, instead of actually having the things that we we can actually do something about. And from a functional medicine perspective, I found the longevity science kind of being almost a representation of the truth that we've known a long time in functional medicine, that their body is a system, that there are underlying root causes of disease, that if we want to really deal with all these diseases that we see, the 155,000 diseases that are in our international classification system, that we need to sort of go back to understand root causes. And in longevity science, there are 10 hallmarks of aging that have been discussed that are underlying all the disease of aging. So heart disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia, the aging process, self, frailty, all those things we now understand are not normal processes. They're abnormal processes that are resulting from disturbances in these fundamental systems or functions. And when they go wrong, we call these the hallmarks of aging. But we can intervene with these things. And they're very much in the functional medicine kind of framework of the body as a system of dealing with root causes. And so I thought by focusing on longevity science, I could help to elucidate what I thought were the flaws in it, which is that it didn't go far enough to look at the causes of the hallmarks. So the hallmarks of aging are the causes of all the diseases in aging. what causes the hallmarks in the first place. And that's where functional medicine comes in, to be able to be a detective and find out where the imbalances are and how we can correct them so we can positively influence these hallmarks of aging. Well, functional medicine is really what will be medicine. It's a whole view of biology that's shifting from a reductionist disease-based model to a systems model of understanding the body as an interconnected network of biological systems that we have to treat as a whole. And functional medicine from the perspective of the patient is about not treating all the individual symptoms and diseases separately, but really treating your whole system. And I'll just give you an example that illustrates the clear difference. This is a patient that I talk about in the book, Young Forever. She was about a 50-year-old woman, business executive coach, who had all sorts of problems. Psoriatic arthritis, which is a terrible condition of the skin and joints. It's quite kind of debilitating. And she was on a drug that cost $50,000 a year for this, an immune suppressant. She also had terrible irritable bowel syndrome and bloating. She had been on lots of antibiotics and steroids. She also had reflux. She had depression. She had insomnia. She had migraines. She also had prediabetes, was overweight. And so rather than, treating all her diseases separately, which were being done, right? She saw the psychiatrist for her depression, the endocrinologist for her prediabetes, the neurologist for her migraines, the gastroenterologist for her GI symptoms, the rheumatologist for her psoriatic arthritis. And she was given the best possible treatment by all these physicians. They were excellent physicians doing exactly what we were taught in medical school and what is exactly the current state of treatment for each of these diseases. However, she was not better. She was marginally improved and her symptoms were mostly or partly managed, but she wasn't better. And so rather than saying, well, I'm just going to kind of up your dose of these drugs or that drugs, I'm going to get to the root cause. And all the diseases that she had were all inflammatory diseases. Her diabetes, her prediabetes, her weight issues, her migraines, her depression, her psoriatic arthritis, obviously, her gut issues. These are all inflammatory. So from a functional medicine perspective, we go, what's causing the inflammation? And I joke and I say I'm an inflammologist, which is actually what we need to be if we're studying longevity, because the whole process of aging is called inflammaging. And so rather than treat all these things separately, I said, well, her gut is where 70% of her immune system lives. She's having terrible gut symptoms. I guarantee you she's got a leaky gut. She's got probably bacterial overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, and a leaky gut, and lots of food sensitivities and reactions. So what I did was simply put her on an elimination diet. I got rid of all the sugar, processed food, gluten, dairy, obviously alcohol, and get her on a whole foods diet with good proteins, lots of good fats, lots of fruits and vegetables. And I said to her, take a fish oil, a vitamin D, probiotic, super simple regimen of supplements that I thought she needed based on her history. I said, don't stop your medication, but just continue to do this and we'll check back in and go over everything in about 6 weeks. So she came back 6 weeks later. She'd stopped all her medication, including the $50,000 drug for her psoriatic arthritis. And I didn't tell her to do it, but she stopped everything. Yeah. Her symptoms were completely gone from everything. Her skin was cleared up. Her joints were cleared up. Her migraines were gone. Her depression was gone. Her insomnia was gone. She lost 20 pounds. Her irritable bowel, her reflux was gone. I also gave her stuff to reset her gut, and a non-absorbed antibiotic and an antifungal that got rid of all the bad guys in her gut that were causing all this inflammation. So this is a case that I really focused on the root cause, which was her gut, to treat all these other problems. And when we got her gut healthy, everything else went away. So when you create health, when you create a healthy system, take out the bad stuff, put in the good stuff, the body has a chance to repair and renew. And that's what's really the exciting part, Rangan, about the longevity research, is that now we understand that the body has this extraordinary ability to renew, repair, rejuvenate, and reverse our biological age. Just as our skin has the ability to heal when we cut it, our body has that innate healing system. We've just done everything possible to interfere with it, to impede it. And the book, Young Forever, is really a roadmap on how do you actually activate these ancient embedded healing systems in our body that can reverse our biological. The feeling is that in the longevity community that we should potentially be vegan because we don't want to overstimulate a particular pathway, one of the hallmarks of aging, which we call mTOR. Now, this is one of the 4 nutrient sensing pathways in our body that samples the environment and the food we're eating and regulates all sorts of biological processes. And this is really the meta hallmark. This is the one that's, I think, the most important, which is how food interacts with our biology to create health or disease or longevity or early death. And so mTOR is stimulated by protein, and particularly by animal protein, because it has higher levels of an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is so important for tripping the switch that builds muscle. So I'm just going to stop for them for a minute because I want to emphasize how important muscle is to longevity. Without muscle, your metabolism goes down, your stress hormones go up, you become more insulin resistant and pre-diabetic, you become more inflamed, and it's this whole cascade of phenomena that occur because your muscle gets replaced with fat. So the key is to build and keep and increase muscle if you can as you get older to enhance longevity. And that you have to do that by tripping the switch of mTOR to build muscle. The problem is if you do that all the time, if mTOR is always stimulated, you actually don't give your body a chance to engage in one of the most important processes that are important for longevity, which is what we call autophagy. Autophagy means self-cleaning or self-cannibalism or self-eating, literally like Pac-Man. And this is a good thing because our body has the ability to go and recycle old parts, to get rid of old proteins and old cells and clean them up and actually, build new stuff, which is great. It's like recycling plastic bottles and making clothes out of it, right? So we have that internal system in our bodies that we have to turn on a regular basis in order to clean up and prevent rapid aging. So that's a good thing. And the way you activate autophagy is by inhibiting mTOR, which means don't give it food or protein, which is a good thing. So what do? Do you not eat protein to turn on autophagy, or do you eat lots of protein to build muscle? Well, the key is both. You need, like any system, you need sometimes it on and sometimes off. You need to sleep and you need to be awake. I mean, it's basically how the body works. So we need overnight to stimulate autophagy by giving ourselves a break from eating, meaning getting no food from dinner until breakfast. So no late night snacking. And you should give at least 12 hours. So if you eat dinner at 6, you can eat 6 in the morning. If you want to extend to 14, that's eating at 8 in the morning. That's doable for most people. 16 hours is a little bit longer. That can also have benefits. And that gives your body a chance to sort of pretend that it's starving, because you're not really starving, but your body thinks it's kind of maybe starving. So it starts to turn all these protective mechanisms that is related to the stress of not eating, called hormesis. And so basically, we can talk about that more, but basically the idea is when you activate autophagy at night, it's a good thing and it's against life. However, you need to give a good protein load in the morning on a fasted state, probably 30 or 40 grams of high quality protein. When I say high quality, I mean it has to have at least 2.5 grams of leucine, which is almost impossible to get from plant protein unless you eat a huge amount, or, which people can't do, like having 6 cups of brown rice or 2 or 3 cups of beans. It's hard for people to eat that much of that stuff. And then you can add the leucine to a plant protein, but you actually have to get the leucine to turn on this. So you can have plant protein powders that are supplemented with amino acids, or you can just have a whey protein shake, or some animal protein, eggs or chicken or fish or whatever you want to eat, and that will turn on mTOR and build muscle. And then if you fast and then load up with protein in the morning and do the resistance training, maybe before you do your protein load, that's the best strategy. And that's how I built muscle, which I basically would be in this fasted state. I would work out and do my half-hour band routine. And then I would have a good protein shake with 40 grams of protein and a bunch of other goodies in it to help me build muscle. And it really works. And it works even despite the fact that as you get older, you get something called anabolic resistance, meaning your body is more resistant to building muscle. So you have to work harder and take more protein. So as we get older, we need more protein and we need more high quality protein. And I think that's really the clear evidence from the scientific literature about what we need to do. But people get into ideological battles about, whether you should or shouldn't eat meat. I think it's really beside the point. The point is, how does our biology work? How do we work with it? How do we activate these pathways in the right way? And how do we give them a rest when we need to give them a rest? Yeah. Even the study that most vegans quote that show that protein is bad for you show that as you get older, it's actually important that you increase your protein intake. So, what people don't understand is that the recommended amounts of protein are the minimum amount to not get a deficiency disease. So how do you not get protein deficiency, which is a very serious disease? You have to eat 0.8 grams per kilo. But that's like how much vitamin D do you need to not get rickets? Probably 30 units. How much vitamin D do you need to optimize your immune system and to prevent cancer and heart disease and all these other benefits? Probably 2 to 4,000, maybe, 10 to 100 times the minimum amount. Yeah. So I'm not saying you should have 100 times the recommended dietary allowance of protein, but you need more than the minimum amount. And for people getting older, it shouldn't be probably 0.8. It should be more like 1.6. And if you're doing a lot of vigorous activity and strength training, you can even have more. So I think both because there's resistance to the effects of eating protein, meaning you need more protein to get the muscle building effect, and the fact that as we get older, we need to make sure our protein needs are met. We do need more protein as we get older. I hated the gym. It was smelly. I didn't want to go in with all the, big guys who were intimidating and lifting all these heavy weights. And I was a skinny guy. So I just kind of didn't go. And I knew I recommended it because the science was clear, but I was kind of resistant to resistance training. And I decided I was going to do it. And I hit 60. It was like in my 59th year. I was like, okay, I'm going to 59. I probably should get on it now. And I started to do it. And it was really life-changing. And I think that most people don't realize the impact of strength training on your balance, on your mobility, on your function, on your metabolism, on your overall well-being, on your hormones. Sex hormones decline as we age, so strength training boosts those. So it has so many benefits that if you want to live a long, healthy life, aside from cutting out sugar and starch, probably the other most important thing is resistance training. If you just get two things from this podcast, is to understand that you need to dramatically reduce or eliminate starch and sugar from your diet, and to start resistance training in some form. It could be body weight, it could be bands, which I do, it could be weights, but make sure you work with someone to do proper form and so forth, so you don't hurt yourself when you're starting out. But it's so important to do. And there's all these apps, there's YouTube videos, there's no lack of instruction out there, but it is something you should consider essential part of health as you get older. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be 30 minutes, 3 times a week. I like to do more, but the reality is I probably only do 3 or 4 times a week because I just don't have the time at this moment. But when I do, I try to do it more and more often. Yeah. But I think the minimum is very adequate, an hour and a half a week. If you don't have an hour and a half a week to invest in your health and what's going on with your life. In fact, I often use this cartoon in my talks where it shows a doctor telling his patient, do you have time to exercise an hour a day or be dead 24 hours a day? I mean, it starts, when you're younger, you can kind of manage, but when you get into your 30s, 40s, we're not talking 60s, 70s here, we're talking 30s, 40s, you start to decline muscle mass. And unless you are fighting that entropy, by the time you're 60 or 70, you're going to be twice as fat as you were, even though you're the same weight. You will become what we call skinny fat, and your muscle will be replaced by fat. So think of a Wagyu ribeye versus a filet mignon. You want the filet mignon because it's much more functional muscle. And what happens is we lose that muscle and we get a disease called sarcopenia, which is something most doctors don't know how to diagnose, don't test for, and don't treat. But it is among the most important and most deadly things that happen to us as we age. What is a big cause of death in the elderly? Falling, and then breaking your hip. And if you break your hip, it's worse than getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer in terms of your mortality rate. So it's a really big deal. And I think that can be almost entirely prevented by resistance training and giving people the strength to be able to hold themselves up, to fall properly if they end up falling, to have stronger bone density, and all the things we need to do as we get older. So the reason people end up in nursing homes and long-term care facilities is not because they're sick with a chronic disease. It's because they can't get out of bed or get out of a chair or tie their shoes or cut their toenails. And so that's the reason. And that is totally fixable by building muscle as we age and staying strong and fit. I mean, I see 100-year-old guys riding horses in these blue zones. It's really impressive. Most people wouldn't even go out without a walker at 100 years old, or if they can get up at all, or if they live that long. So we're seeing, the ability to do functional things as the most important thing. Peter Attia is a friend. He talks about the centenarian decathlon. What are the 10 things you have to do? Like get up off the floor. I mean, I went skiing with my dad when he was in his 70s, and he fell in the ski slope. He couldn't get up. He just could not get his body off the ground. And then I helped him by getting him strength training, and I paid for a trainer for him, and he was able to actually start to regain strength even in his 80s, and even up to almost 90 years old. It was very impressive to see. Well, I mean, we've all evolved in a much more stressful environment. We didn't have perfectly controlled temperatures and humidity and air conditioning and heating, and we just sort of lived out there in nature. And we had periods where we had access to food. We didn't have grocery stores, or periods where we didn't have access to food. And we had to move our bodies a lot just to function. And all these are stresses. So hormesis is essentially a stress that doesn't kill you. And it activates these ancient healing pathways, these ancient longevity switches in your body in ways that we now are fully understanding. And I'll just go through some of them. What's a stress? Well, not eating is a stress. So starvation would be considered stress. So not eating from 6 o'clock at night to 8 in the morning, your body's like, oh, I'm a little short on food here. That's a stress. Let me kick into gear all these healing systems like autophagy, which we mentioned before. Exercise is another kind of stress. When you lift weights, you're tearing your muscles. When you sprint, you're stressing your mitochondria, and that causes them to rebound and become stronger. Those are two examples of hormesis, but there's a lot of other cool ones that are now being used. Hot and cold therapy. Saunas, for example, show a reduction in death by like 40-something% in Finland in these large studies, and does so by, for example, activating your immune system, by fixing your proteins that are damaged as we age with these products that they're produced in a sauna called heat shock proteins. Or cold therapy, cold plunges. It doesn't even have to be a sauna. It can be a hot bath. It can be a cold shower. Most people have a bath and a shower, so I take a cold shower in the morning for 2 minutes. It's a really inexpensive way to activate hormesis. If you want a cold plunge and splurge on that, great. And those are powerful. But I just, fill my bathtub full of cold water, and if you live in a warm climate, you can throw a couple of bags of ice in, and then sit in there for 3-4 minutes. That activates these healing things in your body. And there are also other forms of hormesis that are phytohormesis, plant foods that have little stress molecules that they make to defend themselves. When we consume those in small amounts, they kind of trigger these healing responses, and many of them through these hallmarks of aging. For example, phycetin, which is from strawberries, helps you kill zombie cells. And quercetin also helps to reverse your biological age, working on your epigenetics, and reduces inflammation. So there's all these compounds that we can consume from plants that do this. And then there's some other kind of more advanced therapies like hyperbaric oxygen therapy or hypoxia therapy, where you reduce oxygen levels. These are stresses on the body, and it can actually help to activate longevity pathways. Like in Israel, they did a study on hyperbaric oxygen, and they found that it increased telomeres and killed zombie cells more than any other treatment. And these are things that we see as two of the hallmarks of aging that get worse, and it made them better simply by lying in 100% oxygen at a higher pressure than atmospheric pressure for 60 minutes for 60 sessions over a period of time. So we have real insights into how these stresses can activate these ancient longevity pathways. Yeah. So we mentioned these 10 hallmarks of aging, and then these things that kind of happen as we get older. One of them is, we replicate our DNA, some quadrillion times in our lifetime. And so our DNA has to kind of open up, it has to be read, and then it has to close back up. And that's regulated by these things at the end of your chromosomes called telomeres. As they keep replicating, there's a little bit that gets cut off each time, and they get shorter. They're like the little caps on the end of your shoelaces that prevent it from unraveling. And when they get too short, you end up having problems, and that shortens your life. So telomeres are an important metric to look at as about how we're doing with longevity. The other is zombie cells. Zombie cells are also known as senescent cells. And normally, when cells have gone through their normal process of doing what they do, they die off, and we have a process to do that in our body called apoptosis, which just means you kind of explode the cell and you die and you eat all the parts, and it's sort of a recycling system. But sometimes those cells don't die, and they become zombie cells. And those zombie cells produce all these inflammatory chemicals that go all over your body, and then they kind of make other cells zombie cells, and it creates this whole zombie apocalypse inside, and end up with this state of accelerated inflammation. And that's why we call it aging, inflammaging. So senescent cells are things that can be changed or gotten rid of through some things like hyperbaric oxygen or certain senolytic therapies that can be from plant compounds that we can use. So maybe even drugs will be senolytic drugs. We're learning more about this as we go on, but these zombie cells are not good for you, and hyperbaric oxygen can help to get rid of them, which is great. Well, like guinea pigs don't make vitamin C. Humans don't make vitamin C. Many other species of animals do. We don't make it because we're lazy. Our biology, we don't want to do anything that we don't have to do with our biology to conserve energy. So we co-evolved with plants to use their compounds as medicines to help regulate our biology. And animals do this. If you see a wild animal or a cow that's pasture raised, they will graze on a few major food crops, but then they'll sample maybe 100 other crops, plants, to actually activate medicinal properties in those plants for themselves. They don't know that, but they kind of intuitively figure this out and keep themselves healthy, which is quite interesting. And so the same thing with humans. We've co-evolved with these plants, and over 800 species of plants as hunter-gatherers that contain these rich phytochemical compounds that we now are understanding that maybe we thought there were 25,000. There may be 1 million of these things in plants. And we're starting to catalog them and understand their mechanisms of action, how they work. When we say food is medicine, that's what we mean. We mean inside the food we're eating, there are medicinal compounds that our body uses to activate various pathways. For example, one of the key findings, for example, around longevity was the activation of sirtuins. Sirtuins is one of the 4 longevity switches that are in the hallmark of aging called deregulated nutrient sensing, meaning how do we sense our nutrition environment and how do we regulate different processes based on whether we're eating the wrong stuff or the right stuff. And so resveratrol, which comes from grapes, actually works on sirtuins to activate sirtuins, which kicks in this whole system of DNA repair and improving insulin sensitivity and mitochondrial function and helping to reduce inflammation. And it's a really amazing thing that happens when you properly regulate sirtuins. Well, resveratrol is a plant compound that is acting on that pathway, for example. Doesn't mean you should be drinking red wine. I want to be careful with that because we now know that alcohol is actually, even in lower amounts than we thought, can be harmful and increase risk of cancer, and is definitely not a health promoting activity. It's fine to do once in a while as a recreational fun thing to do, but it's not something you want to do every day. And I think the compounds in the red grapes actually do act on this pathway. So that's one example.
Are the people living in blue zones drinking alcohol?
Yeah, they are. They're having a glass of wine here and there, but we have to understand that there is a phenomena in science called the healthy user effect. And this means that we can get kind of confused in studies where we say, oh, it seems like people drinking alcohol live longer, or they do this or that. It may be the other things they're doing, right? If we're told that, having a glass of wine is good for you, then maybe the people who are drinking the wine are engaging in other healthy behaviors, right? They're exercising, they're eating more fruits and vegetables, they're not smoking. So we have to be careful of these biases that are inherent in studying people, where we thought, for example, that hormones were protective for women against heart disease and cancer and stroke and dementia because of a population study where they found, women who seemed to take hormones had less of these problems. Well, it was because these women were healthier as a group because they went to the doctor more, they paid more attention to their health, they exercised more, they didn't smoke, they ate more fruits and vegetables. That's why they had less heart disease, cancer, stroke, and dementia. And when they did a randomized controlled trial called the Women's Health Initiative, it was $1 billion study, 160,000 women. They literally had to stop the trial partway through because so many women were dying who were taking the hormones. It's because of the bias in the first study that was called the healthy user effect. And that's what's going on when you look at some of the data. Well, yes, the people in the blue zones drink a little wine, but what else did they do? They weren't exposed to environmental toxins. They had really no chronic stresses. They had deep sense of meaning, purpose, and community. They ate foods that were original, like almost heirloom foods, a lot of wild foods they eat in Nicaria. They had animal foods, but they had animals that were eating all these wild plants that had phytochemicals in them. They had natural exercise that they did as part of their life. So what was it? Was it the alcohol or was it all this other stuff? It's also different. Like in Icaria, they made wine according to their ancient methods. They kind of smushed it with their feet. The grapes were grown in tough soils, so they were much higher in phytochemicals. They didn't have any sulfites. They kind of
Yeah.
kind of fermented them in these clay pots underneath the soil. And sometimes it didn't work out and they were all organic. There were no pesticides. So who knows? It was quite different. Drank the wine in Kari and I was like, normally wine makes me feel like crap. I just get brain fog and feel kind of off. And I drank this wine. I felt great. I was like, wow, this is really different. But it's not wine that you can actually even take home with you because, they can't ship it. They can't really bottle it. It's really served fresh. It's very different. If you want to climb 5 miles on a rocky mountain every day, if you want to sleep 8-9 hours, if you want to have no chronic stress, be exposed to no toxins, have a deep sense of community, meaning and purpose, and eat like only heirloom traditional foods that are completely unprocessed, you probably could have a glass of wine. It's not going to hurt you. So, I think the thing that we've missed is that, nutrition, we look at a reductionist view, what is needed, amino acids, fatty acids, carbohydrates, some vitamins and minerals. And it turns out that, you can give people nutrition through an intravenous tube, which contains all these elements. But what is missing is a lot of the stuff that actually really is necessary for health, which are these things that were not considered essential nutrients, but that I consider essential. They're not necessarily going to give you a deficiency disease if you don't eat them. But if you don't eat them over a long period of time, chronic disease will accelerate and you won't protect yourself against all these ravages of aging. And I think this is such an important concept for people to understand that these are medicines in food. And I have a whole chart in the book about how different compounds in food, whether it's certain classes of foods like onions and garlic, which have quercetin, or other foods like the broccoli family that has glucoferrin, which is important for longevity, or whether it's certain, phytochemicals in green tea like catechins that activate different pathways, or the mushrooms that have polysaccharides that regulate immunity. I go through all the different foods that we can choose from the grocery store, what I call the pharmacy, Pharmacy, and we can use those foods as a part of our daily consumption to activate some of these longevity pathways and switches. So it's not hard to do, but it's important that we consider that these compounds are really essential for us if we want to have vibrant health. The truth is that there are therapeutic diets that can be applied in different patients that need different things. So do I think everybody should be on a keto diet? No. Do I think it's therapeutic diet that can be very effective for some people? Absolutely. Do I think carnivore diet is the diet we should all be on? No. Do I think it could be effective for certain people? Yes. And part of it is not the meat that they're eating, it's what they're not eating. Right? They're not eating sugar. They're not eating processed food. They're not having gluten. They're typically not having dairy. They're not having any of the typical processed inflammatory foods that are causing so many of the symptoms. So, for example, if you get off grains and beans, you're removing a lot of things that potentially are bothering people's gut. And not that grains and beans are bad, but for certain people, they are, right? So if you have an autoimmune disease, if you have leaky gut, if you have various inflammatory problems, it may be a real factor. So I often will put people on a more restricted diet in order to reset their biology and see what's working and what's not. And we call that in functional medicine an elimination diet. So a carnivore diet, in a sense, is a very extreme elimination diet with one basic food group. Now, the truth is that, you can get phytochemicals from animal foods if you eat regeneratively raised animals or wild animals. In Icari and Sardinia, they were taking their goats and sheep and they were taking them to eat all these different wild plants at different times of the year because they knew, not because it had phytochemicals, they knew it would taste better if it had this plant or that plant at this time of the year, that the milk and the meat would taste better, the cheese would taste better. Flavor always follows phytochemical richness in our food. So where our flavor comes from, other than the additives, is from the colorful compounds in the food, like a ripe tomato or, a nice juicy peach in the summer, or something that is from, asparagus just picked from the garden, tastes way different than asparagus you buy in the store. These are because of the phytochemicals in them. But when you are eating a carnivore diet, you're eliminating most of the things, but you are maybe getting some phytochemicals in the food. You're also getting, fatty acids. And if you're eating the right kinds of meat, you're getting some omega-3s. You're getting lots of nutrients, zinc. You have to probably eat organ meats to get all the vitamins that you need. So there's some tricks to it. But I think that it is a pretty interesting way of thinking about treating lots of different conditions that are inflammatory. And I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think it's a long-term strategy. And when you look at our biological needs, we need small amounts of essential fatty acids, in the gram level. There is no biological requirement for carbohydrate, but there is a large requirement for the macronutrient protein. It's the only one for which there's a large requirement as part of our diet. So I think people can do fine on that. I worry long-term, but it's about looking at the numbers. What does your numbers look like? I just saw a patient the other day who was on it and their cholesterol went crazy. So there may be individual responses that are quite different, even to the same diet. And I think that's what people need to understand. There's no one size fits all. There's not, vegan diet's great for everybody or carnivore diet's great for everybody. It's really about what's great for you. And that's, as a physician, what my interest is not in, research studies with thousands of people. It's like, what is happening to that person in front of me? And let's do what we call an N of one experiment. Let's try whatever you want to try, or let's try what I think might be best based on the research. And let's measure again how you do.
Yeah.
If you get better, great. If you get worse, let's change our strategy. I mean, you have to add in all the good stuff and you have to take out the bad stuff. I mean, if you're eating, 3 cups of broccoli a day, but having 3 Coca-Colas, I don't think it's going to do the same thing as if you get rid of the Coca-Colas and eat, more whole foods. So I think we do need to get rid of stuff, and we also need to add stuff. So they're both really important. I think the key is trying to include more and more of the things that are good for you and slowly eliminate things that are bad for you. And I think people can get there. Now, what I often recommend, because if you do the incremental approach, you might not see the benefits as fast, is a short-term 10-day reset. And I call it the 10-day detox diet. I've written a book about it. It's sort of highlighted in a little bit in the book about how to do that. But the key is when you kind of remove all the bad stuff, potentially bad stuff, because it may not be bad, right? Gluten may not be bad for everybody. But if you remove all the stuff that potentially is bad for 10 days, your body will get the chance to reset. And what I've seen by doing that there's a 70% reduction in all symptoms from all diseases in 10 days. That's migraines, irritable bowel, depression, arthritis, whatever it is, gets better in 10 days. Now, if it doesn't get better, maybe something else is going on. Maybe you have Lyme disease or mercury poisoning or something else causing it. But most of the time, a lot of the ailments that we're suffering from are because of what we're eating, and a short-term reset can be extremely powerful. So you can do an incremental approach if you want, but I encourage people to do a reset, because then you go, oh, shoot, I didn't realize how much food was affecting how I feel. Yeah. And how much better I can feel in so few days. It's not like months or years of doing this to see a result. It's literally days. It's true. Your body does have these natural systems, but we do everything to impede them, right? We are overloading our metabolisms with bad food. We're not eating enough fiber, and our guts are often messed up. We're often not drinking enough water and eliminating. Our liver pathways aren't optimized to detoxify all the chemicals that we're consuming from our foods and our environment. And so we need to help boost them a little bit. And I think most of the science around detoxification is very clear. We have these detoxification systems. They're often not working well, and we need to increase their function in order to be healthy. And the other kind of connotation of detox means get rid of the bad stuff, right? So yes, it does mean detox from sugar and processed food and so forth. So there's both the sort of, the sort of hard science of our detoxification organs and systems and how to optimize those. But there's also the reality that we're eating a lot of crap and we need to get rid of it. And that's another sort of way of thinking about it. Yeah. So, we have a lot of ways in which diet influences these hallmarks. The main way is through what we call deregulated nutrient sensing. It affects these 4 longevity switches, which has to do with insulin signaling, mTOR, which we talked about, and protein, and 2 others. Sirtuins we mentioned about how it works to repair DNA, and also one we didn't talk about called AMPK that is involved in regulating blood sugar and so forth. And those are really important impacts. And if we eat too much sugar and starch, it screws all those longevity switches up. But it also does something else. It actually forms these globs with protein. So sugar and proteins interact and form these damaged proteins. So think about creme brulee, or think about crispy chicken skin or crust on a bread. That's the proteins and the sugars in that kind of forming this crust. And that is not bad if you're eating it, although you don't want to eat too much of those because they do affect you. But it's what happens on the inside. So we become literally crusted on the inside, and we get what we call advanced glycation end products. They're called AGEs. Literally, they're called AGEs, and they bind to these receptors called RAGEs, or receptors for advanced glycation end products. So you are aging and raging, literally, if you eat too much sugar and starch. And they form these globs. And one of the ways we regulate people with diabetes is measuring this glob of protein and sugar called hemoglobin A1C, meaning your hemoglobin, your oxygen carrying system, is damaged by the sugar, and it forms these funky proteins that are kind of sticky and drive inflammation. So that's really a bad thing. It's not just a measure of your blood sugar, but this is happening everywhere in your body. We just measure it in terms of blood sugar, but it's happening everywhere in the brain. It causes dementia. So we need to be very clear that damaged proteins are a big part of aging. Now, we can fix those damaged proteins. We can learn how to recycle them, clean them up. We can use saunas, and there's lots of ways to fix these damaged proteins. But the key is to make sure you don't create them in the first place through eating too much starch and sugar. Look, I mean, there's two things here. One is, do we want to live forever? That's a very big philosophical question. And I think, in my perspective, this is a personal view, I don't want to live forever. But what if I could live another 50 or 60 or 80 years of vibrant life? What could I contribute? What could I do? What could I add in terms of value to the world? And I think people in their minds think of an aging population as being a drain on society, as being a cost, as being a huge risk for our population, because we're going to end up with all these old people who need care and so forth. But when you look at sort of some of the data from David Sinclair and others that looked at the macroeconomic analysis of what happens if you create healthy older people, not sick older people, because we all agree that sick older people is bad for everybody and bad for the economy and bad for society. But if they're healthy older people, if you extend life by a year, healthy life by a year, you add $37 trillion to the economy. If you do a 10-year life extension, that's $367 trillion. That is an enormous amount of money. I mean, the GDP of the United States is like, I think it's like 20 trillion. So, I mean, that's an enormous amount of money. And so we actually have to look at it from a social perspective and say, okay, well, if we did this right, it would add a lot of healthy older people. And what does that do? Well, that adds more wisdom, more insight, more learning. And at 63, I think I could easily get to 100 years of healthy life, functional life. I think maybe by the time I get there, we'll learn enough so I can probably get to 120. Do I want to be 150? Depends. I mean, if I'm functional, if I can ski and I can make love and I can ride my bike and I can hang out with my friends and I can do all the things I want to do, well, why not? And the truth about my life, and this I think is probably true for most people, as we get older, we get a little smarter. We understand how life works a little better. We understand that we can be in contribution to the world. So imagine people who actually can add value and be in contribution, just as in the old society, there were elders who were revered and respected and held the wisdom. We've lost that. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to actually kind of regain some of the wisdom of being older instead of people who are on the decline. So I'm 63. I feel like I'm just starting my life now. I finally feel like I'm figuring this stuff out of how to live well and be happy and to be of value and to add back into the world. And now I don't want to stop. I want to keep going.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the thing that people just absolutely need to understand is that you have this exquisite thing called the body that you are inhabiting for a short period of time. And that embedded in that body is an incredible healing system that we are able to activate if we just learn how. And Young Forever is a roadmap to activating these ancient healing, longevity, rejuvenating, repairing, renewing systems that will provide us not just longer life, but a healthier, better life.
We're all looking for the source of longevity. So this is not a new idea, but I think medicine has really ignored the idea that we could do anything about aging. Yeah. And it's not been a subject of research. It's not been a subject of exploration from any rigorous point of view. And so it sort of was on the back burner as a sort of non-entity until recently, when billions of dollars started pouring into the longevity research field, and we started making discoveries about the root causes and how we begin to think differently about this. So I think we're in this extraordinary moment that we haven't been in before. And I can see, even talking about reversing disease is a black mark against you. As, can I reverse heart disease? Can you reverse diabetes? Can you reverse dementia? No, but actually, yes. Just paradigm shift where the old ideas of what we thought were true about disease are shifting. And now we're understanding the underlying mechanisms of things that go wrong that underlie all disease. And so that's the exciting part of aging research, is it's pointing to what I've been looking at for a long time, which is the body as a system. It's systems theory, systems biology, systems medicine, clinically applied through the lens of functional medicine. But most of the practitioners have no education in this, and we're learning reductionist medicine, which you did and I did in medical school. It's really about understanding the body as an integrated ecosystem where everything is connected and everything is determining everything all the time. So it's about looking at root causes. It's about treating the system, not the symptoms. It's about understanding the why, not the what, not what disease do you have and what drug do I give, but why is this happening and how do I understand the biology underneath it? So it's very much taking sort of the advances that are happening in systems biology and systems medicine and trying to create a clinically useful methodology to apply these ideas. And that's what it is. And it's not a new specialty. It's not a new sort of alternative therapy. It's basically a new methodology for interpreting data through the lens of the body as an ecosystem, where you have to look at root causes and you have to treat the body and create health. So I always say the disease is the body's best attempt to deal with a bad set of circumstances. You remove those circumstances, and the body has this extraordinary, powerful innate healing system that repairs, regenerates, renews, and that's what we learn how to activate in longevity medicine. Is we're understanding how to activate these ancient longevity switches that are embedded in us, that are supposed to keep us alive and healthy, as opposed to turning on all the disease switches, which we do through our modern lifestyle. I felt that it was important to write this book because as I began to look at the field of longevity research and longevity science, I felt like there was something missing, and what isn't missing is this reimagination of disease according to the hallmarks of aging, which we can get into what those are, what they mean, and we'll dive into that. But these hallmarks of aging are the things that seem to go wrong as we get older that we can influence and reverse, and literally reverse our biological age. And that are the reasons why we see all the diseases, from heart disease to diabetes to cancer to dementia. All the age-related diseases are the result of these fundamental biological processes that go awry. Now, what that is a huge advance in understanding of targets for treatment, whether it's through pharmaceuticals or lifestyle or meditation or stem cells or whatever. But the truth is that what was missing was the question of why. Why do these things go wrong? What is the cause of the hallmarks? So if the hallmarks are the cause of disease and diseases are the cause of aging, what's the cause of the hallmarks? And so functional medicine gives us a way to think about that. And it's really comes down to really two simple questions that I learned from my mentor, Sid Baker, which is, what do you have too much of that your body doesn't like, you need to get rid of? Toxins, allergens, microbes, stress, poor diet, etc. And what are the things you need to thrive? What are the ingredients for health? The right food, nutrients, the right balance of hormones, light, air, clean water, exercise, sleep, connection, meaning, love, purpose. All these things are the ingredients for health. So you're either dying of too much of something or dying of not enough of something, right? And so that was what I wanted to highlight was take a look at where the longevity field is, what actually could be helping it to actually even accelerate further the results that people get from a biological standpoint. And how do we not just go back into a reductionist model of treating the hallmarks of aging with reductionist therapies? And you look around and you go to the average hospital or, see old people, which we kind of hide them in this culture, with frailty, disability, disease, and people's health span is far shorter than their lifespan. Maybe the last 20 years of their life are in poor health. That means your health span's, let's say 60, but you live to 80. That means you've lost 20 years of health span. And that's what we come to think of as normal in this culture. But I've been to places like Sardinia where people are 100 years old or 95 years old, and they're still hiking 5 miles up the mountain and straight up as an arrow and booming voices and clear minds. And I'm like, this is impressive. So I think we come to accept what we see around us as normal, but it's really not. And there are many examples around the world where people are practicing habits by default, not because they're into longevity, but just by default, their cultures have created an environment that promotes longevity. And as soon as they move to a Western world, they get the same rate of death and disease as we do. Like I was in Sardinia and Icaria and, Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. I mean, there's a guy he was riding his horse straight up and narrow at 101 yeyears old in Costa Rica. I'm like, man, most people even wouldn't want to walk around the street without a walker at 100 years old. Let's jump up on a horse. And, you put energy in a system, you can change entropy, right? Entropy happens without putting any energy in a system. And the the reasons I think that we see this sort of acceleration is because of the habits we have and the lifestyle we have. But if we actually change those and look at what are the biggest drivers for these hallmarks of aging, it's food. I think there's the hierarchy. They're not all created equal, these hallmarks. And one of the most important is this deregulated nutrient sensing, which is how we sample the food we're eating and how it influences these longevity switches, which there are 4. 2 of them basically detect too much stuff and the other detect too little. So mTOR and insulin signaling detect too much protein and sugar and carbs, and insulin does the same. It's mostly sugar and carbs. And AMPK and sirtuins detect not enough, scarcity, and then they get activated. So when these switches are properly managed, and it's not like you can have them all on or on off. I think a lot of people get confused. Oh, mTOR is bad. Let's shut off mTOR. Well, no, if you do that, you're going to end up without any muscle or be able to synthesize proteins. So if food is the biggest driver. And so when you look at our diet, it's the incredibly high amounts of starch and sugar and processed food. Well, the dose makes the poison, right? So having a little bit of sugar is not going to kill you, but it's the fact that we eat the equivalent of about a pound a day per person of sugar and flour, and below the neck, sugar and flour in your body are the same. In fact, the glycemic index of bread is 100. That's the gold standard. Sugar is 65, which is better than bread. That's because it has fructose, which doesn't spike glucose. But basically bread and sugar are the same. And we eat about 152 pounds of sugar and 133 pounds of flour on average per person. That's average. Now, I'm not having that much. So some people are having a lot more. And that's driving the fact that we have 93% of Americans that are metabolically unhealthy, which means they have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, or they're overweight, or they have had a heart attack or a stroke. That's like 6% of us basically, or 6.8% of us are in good metabolic health. That's terrifying to me, and that's driven by our diet primarily. So I think if you look at the science of longevity, there are like many cultures with many different diets, whether the Inuit or the Maasai who eat primarily animal-based diets, or you've got maybe cultures where they eat more plant-based diets, like in Okinawa, but they still have pork and they still have meat. I think it's really about the quality of the information you're putting in, because as we talked about, and David Sinclair talks about the information theory of aging. Mm-hmm. Food is information and it's signal. So everything that you do, whether it's what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, your level of stress, toxins, your microbiome, all is washing over your biology and creating inputs. This is the exposome that influence everything that's happening. And the remarkable thing is, Peter, the rapidity of change of your biology when you change those things is so fast. Like you could be type 2 diabetic on insulin, and in 3 days you're off insulin. And in 3 months you're, basically your blood sugar is normal and you've reversed all your diseases. So that's the power of food. And so when I think about food, it's about having high amounts of these plant-rich phytochemical diets. And I think some people argue with that, but we should be a carnivore, but I'm not sure that's the best idea. I think high quality protein is really important. This is a highly debatable subject in longevity, because many longevity experts are talking about you being vegan or actually eliminating animal protein as a way to extend life. And that really comes from this whole theory about mTOR being a problem, and that we need to inhibit mTOR, which means mammalian targeted rapamycin. We'll get into rapamycin, but the idea is that this longevity switch is in every cell in your body when you overstimulate it by eating too much protein, or eating all the time protein, that it will cause overgrowth of tissues and cancers and heart diseases and all the problems that we see with aging. The problem is, it's like anything else. If you inhibit it all the time, you waste away and you're frail and you die. Like if your calorie restriction, which is what this does, induce mTOR inhibition, right? Calorie restriction is the thing that actually everybody agrees will lengthen your life by a third if you eat a third less calories. You'll be miserable and scrawny and have no sex drive and your hair's falling out, but you'll live longer. The big hack is, how do we mimic calorie restriction? Well, the idea is if you don't, stimulate mTOR with high levels of animal protein, then you can extend your life. And there's some rationale to that, but you also need muscle, because muscle is the currency of longevity. And if you don't have muscle, so it's the Goldilocks problem. You want to turn it on, mTOR, and you also want to give it a break so you can do cleanup and repair. So think about your body has its own recycling cleanup mechanism. It's called autophagy, which means self-eating, self-cannibalism. And it's basically like a little Pac-Man that runs around and gobbles up old proteins and parts. And think about it, if you're starving, your body still needs to get proteins and it still needs to do stuff and make things. But if you're not eating, what are you going to do? So you basically go around and you recycle all the old parts and you make new stuff, which is basically what your body does. It's brilliant. And the way it does it is through this process called autophagy, which is essential to cleanup, repair, renewal, regeneration. And also activates all these other longevity pathways, like reducing inflammation, increasing mitochondrial function. So everything you need to do to survive if you're starving so you don't die, it kind of turns it on, which is great. And that's an important thing to do every day. So you can do that by not eating for 12 hours between dinner and breakfast. If you want to go to 14, that's great. So that means eating at 6 at night and having breakfast at 8 in the morning. That's not a hard thing to do. That's a really simple way every day to induce autophagy. The other is to activate mTOR in the right way, which means not eating all the time, like not eating, bedtime snacks and flooding it with all this stuff, and then eating a big load of protein in the morning when you wake up in a fasted state. And my favorite way to do it, because I don't necessarily want a steak for breakfast, is I have my healthy aging shake, which I talk about in the book Young Forever. Essentially, it's got regeneratively raised goat whey. I sort of use some other pumpkin seed powders, just a little plant proteins in there, and I put in creatine. I put in something called urolithin A, which is an incredible mitophagy compound that comes from pomegranate and helps build muscle, and a few other things like adaptogenic mushrooms and some things from my gut, and I kind of make it like a healthy shake. But basically you've got this 30, 40 grams of protein, 30 at least per meal. Usually, this is the problem with protein. If you look at the data, we say, you should eat 0.8 grams per kilo. This is the RDA. Now that people don't understand what that is. That's the minimum you need to not get protein deficiency. How much vitamin D do you need to not get rickets? 30 units. Well, how much vitamin D do you need for optimal health? Maybe 2,000, 4,000.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very important to understand what these are. And so particularly when you're older, it actually is important for you to eat more protein because there's something called anabolic resistance, meaning it's harder to build muscle. And the worst thing you can do is not exercise throughout your life and then end up, at 65 being the same weight that you were when you're 25, but you're twice as fat because all your muscles get marbled like a big Wagyu ribeye, and then they're metabolically super unhealthy and drive inflammation, low cortisol. And they'll kind of put a point on this. People say, you can do this with plant proteins, and what I typically found is that people who are vegan, who are jacked, and I've studied this, they actually eat a lot of processed plant protein, so they actually have to supplement with plant protein, and you have to eat an enormous amount. I was just in Rwanda and we saw the gorillas. Now gorillas are huge. I'm like, what do they eat? I was like, what do they eat? They eat 55 pounds of food a day. Have digestive systems are like 10 times longer than ours, huge, and they're big. Like these giant bellies. It's not because they're fat. It's because their intestines are enormous because it takes forever to digest all this stuff and extract the food. And they have much longer large intestines where you can start to sort of ferment and break down these foods and start to absorb them. So we have shorter intestines. We have the ability to actually use animal protein, which they don't really. They eat insects, but they're massive. And the key about muscle building is you need a certain amount of a particular amino acid called leucine. Now, leucine is what we call rate-limiting amino acid. It means if you don't have this amino acid, it's hard to turn on muscle synthesis. It's like turning on a light switch. So plant proteins are typically low in leucine. So you can get enough by eating tons of plant protein, but you need like a lot more than you could possibly eat. You're not going to eat 55 pounds of food a day. And so, especially as you get older, you need probably 1.2 to 1.6, even 2 grams per kilo if you want to build muscle and get stronger. And you need to have high leucine protein. Now you can take plant proteins and supplement with leucine. I call them like jacked up plant proteins, and that's fine if you are a committed vegan, you want to do that. But you can't ignore the fact that you're going to have to eat a lot of these processed proteins, and that meat has carnosine and also creatine and carnitine, which are incredibly helpful compounds that are not in plant proteins that are required for. Well, my day, if like I'm at home, I'll have like my healthy aging shake. I'll usually have a 14-hour fast minimum. I usually work out.
Yep.
Do band resistance training, which is great because I can do it anywhere and don't hurt myself. And then I have my healthy aging shake.
Yep.
Well, actually, I do some hormesis practice first, which is essentially steam and then an ice bath. And then I have my shake and I take my supplements. And then lunch can be a combination of things, but it can be usually a salad with like proteins I'll put in sardines or canned salmon or something like that, nuts and seeds, avocado, pumpkin seeds. So I'll do a lot of fat and protein and veggies. And then dinner will typically be, grass or regeneratively fed beef or lamb or organic chicken or pasteurized chicken or different kinds of fish that are low in mercury. And then I'll usually have I'm kind of very low body fat, and I don't do well if I don't eat a little bit of carbohydrates. So I'll have like a Japanese sweet potato. So let's just walk through it. So when you eat sugar, what happens? Or when I say sugar, I mean any kind of starch that will raise your blood sugar. You produce insulin. And insulin is a special kind of hormone that's produced by your pancreas that is designed to put blood sugar into your cells. But when you have high levels of sugar, you have to make more insulin. And insulin not only drives the fat into the fat cells to store, but it also shuts off the release valve so you can't actually burn the fat. So it shuts down lipolysis, which is the burning of fat. It slows your metabolism down, and it increases your hunger hormones. So you're hungrier, you're gaining weight, you can't burn the fat, and your metabolism is slower. So it totally screws you up. And then it produces these special kinds of fat cells in your belly called adipocytes, which are producing adipocytokines, which are inflammatory compounds. So you basically have a fire in your belly, spewing out all this inflammation throughout your body. It lowers your hormones. So males, their testosterone drops way down, their sex drive and function goes down. Women get all kinds of other hormonal dysregulation. It affects your brain. You get increased cortisol and adrenaline with sugar, and cortisol causes literally shrinkage of your hippocampus, which is the memory center. So it's just bad news.
It's bad stuff.
And then it does this thing which we were just hinting at, which it kind of too much sugar goes around and forms globs with proteins called glycation products. And when you measure hemoglobin A1C, which is what we do to measure how your blood sugar is controlled if you're diabetic, you get high levels of these glycated hemoglobins, but it happens to all these proteins, and it happens in your brain. They're called AGEs. Literally, the name of it is called AGEs, Advanced Glycation End Products, and they bind to receptors called RAGEs. So you're aging and raging when you eat sugar. You can take all these supplements, do all these hacks, take all the stem cells you want, but if you don't have the basics right, the nutrient sensing problem, which leads to problems with these 4 longevity switches, which is insulin, too much insulin from sugar, mTOR, which is overstimulation with too much, food in general and protein, sirtuins, which are really important in DNA repair, which if you're always eating, never get turned on. And that's why we're talking about NAD, AMPK, which also is regulating glucose and mitochondrial function. That's what people are taking metformin for, to sort of regulate that. So these are really important, and I talk a lot about them in the book. Then the next one is that we see is and in no particular order. There's telomere shortening, which are little caps at the end of your chromosomes that open up so you can basically replicate like a copy machine your DNA, and we replicate some quadrillion amount of times for our life. It's ridiculous, but sometimes that goes wrong, and you end up shortening your telomeres, and you end up with a shorter life because you have shorter telomeres, and that's highly influenced by your lifestyle, what you do. Senescent cells, also known as zombie cells. Zombie cells are produced in part sometimes by this problem with DNA replication that goes wrong, and cells, instead of being like exploded and dying, we call apoptosis, they turn into these zombie cells that never die and run around your body spewing inflammation and kind of almost infecting other cells. And so you get this runaway senescent inflammation. And there's some really cool things that are out there that can regulate those. Some compounds like phycetin from strawberries. There's things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy that's been shown to, kill zombie cells. So there's all these sort of good things about killing zombie cells. We have mitochondrial dysfunction. The mitochondria are the cellular energy powerhouses, and when those go wrong, we just lose energy. Why does a 3-year-old run around like a jackrabbit, and 90-year-olds like moving super slow? It's because their mitochondria are running at different rates. They're less mitochondria, they're poor functioning mitochondria. So keeping your mitochondria healthy is a key part of healthy aging. There's also proteins that get damaged, and we just talked about that. The glycated proteins, and you get all proteins are 3-dimensional structures.
They're everything.
Have to be, are they like the information superhighway of your body? And there's peptides, there's proteins, and they have to be functioning in the right shape and the right size and in the right kind of amino acid sequence. And when they're not right, they cause all kinds of damage. And you get these old funky proteins. And so things like saunas, for example, increase heat shock proteins in your body, which help kind of fix these damaged proteins. Increasing autophagy helps that. And even transfer plasma exchanges, where you kind of filter out the old blood and the plasma, you can get rid of a lot of this stuff. So there's all these cool therapies that are coming to fix these. We also see, in addition, DNA damage. So DNA damage is something that happens all day. You got 100,000 little cuts a day, and your body has a whole DNA repair system. That
tied to the sirtuins.
It's sirtuins that are activated by NAD and by the right diet, and screwed up by sugar, by the way. and those mechanisms, might miss a couple here and there to repair. It's amazing it does as well it does, but there's ways of improving that. And then we have also the tiring of your stem cells or lifestyle and so forth. So many ways to sort of activate your stem cells. There's some really cool things looking at, I'm not going to get into, it's kind of wacky, but like using different kinds of light and stuff in your pineal gland to activate different stem cells and harvest them. And they're doing the stuff in Costa Rica. It's kind of wacky, but there's ways of dealing with that. And then we also have the problem of inflammation, which is, in a sense, the final common pathway that either causes or is a consequence of almost all these things. So inflammation in the body is driving almost all the chronic diseases of aging, whether it's arthritis or dementia or cancer or heart disease or diabetes, or all these are inflammatory problems. And so we have to understand the cause of inflammation. We have to become an inflammologist. And if you fix a lot of these other things, like, and some things we can't do anything about, right? We live in a sea of toxins. Like, 200 years ago, we didn't have all the crap we make, all the petrochemical toxins. Heavy metals are more in the ocean because of coal and lead. So I see a lot of these things that aren't people's fault, that are the result of environmental stresses, but we can deal with those. And so thinking, and the last hallmark that I talked about is the microbiome. I think I got all 10. I don't know if I did. The microbiome is this whole ecosystem of bugs in your gut that's so critical for regulating immunity, for regulating cancer risk, heart disease risk, diabetes, even dementia. Your mood, everything is controlled by the microbiome. And what's interesting is that we're now measuring your metabolome, which is sum total of all the metabolites in your blood, and a huge portion of these come from the microbiome. And they're regulating everything. So like one of the cool things in the book I talk about is how if you eat pomegranate and you have the right bacteria, the metabolite of pomegranate is called urolithin A. And this compound, which you have to have the right gut bacteria, which most of us don't, actually is an anti-aging compound. It enhances fitness, VO2 max, muscle building, and fitness, and also mitophagy without even exercising. The epigenetic one is really a way we're now understanding that aging occurs at a meta level. That your genome is basically fixed, and you've talked about this with Tony in your book. The genome is fixed. You've got a certain amount of genes. That doesn't change. But what genes get turned on or off, which gets expressed, is determined by everything watching over those genes, your exposome. Like you talk about the piano player and how the piano player can play, ragtime jazz, classical rock on the same genes, right? And so we have to understand that most of the insults that we do to ourselves, too much stress, lack of sleep, poor diet, lack of exercise, exposure to toxins, all these things influence our epigenome. And we'll put little tags and determine which genes get read or not. But those are changeable. Look, we now, for the first time, and it clearly needs to be refined, but we have a biomarker that we didn't have to track influences of whatever we want to do, whether it's our diet or lifestyle or medication, on our biological age. So our biological age is different than our chronological age. I'm 63. I was born in 1959. Nothing I can do about that. Biologically, I'm 43, according to DNA methylation testing. So DNA methylation is how our epigenome is regulated. In mostly, there's a few other ways, but essentially that's how our epigenome is determined. And so we can now do an intervention and see what happens. And so in the book, I talk about some of the early studies, whether giving quercetin or dastanib, or whether using vitamin D, or whether using a Mediterranean diet. And they're all seeing changes from months to years. And one of the studies that was most impressive was a functional medicine study looking at a very aggressive functional medicine diet, which is way more than just like a Mediterranean diet, but it's super anti-inflammatory. It's very rich in phytochemicals, very rich in methylating compounds, combined with the simple lifestyles things. And they found within 8 weeks, they were able to change their DNA methylation patterns, reverse their biological clock in 8 weeks by 3 years.
Wow.
So that's what's exciting to me. You can use intermediate biomarkers, like inflammation markers, cholesterol, and other things which are helpful, and insulin levels and hormone levels and all this stuff. And I think that's important. But that's variable. You don't really know what's happening to your epigenome with that. But you can now measure directly the epigenome, and that's what's so exciting. I do think that there's some things coming down the road that you talk about that are kind of weird and wacky things that are more sci-fi. They're not the basics that we're talking about that I think are safe and effective. And that has to do with genetic manipulation, like the Yamanaka factors. And I think that stuff's really interesting to me. I mean, it's still not ready for prime time, but basically this is discovery by this guy Yamanaka from Japan, who won the Nobel Prize for understanding that these 4 transcription factors that seem to help embryonic cells differentiate into their mature cells. So how does your nose become a nose, or your kidney become a kidney, or your brain become a brain? Like there's a thing, and then it stops. It doesn't just keep developing, right? And so if you can go back and somehow modify or insert these transcription factors into the body and then have a switch externally that you turn them on. So let's say you're 50 and your hair's a little gray, your joints are good, your erections aren't so good, your muscle wasting a little bit. You go, oh, I'm going to just take this thing and switch it on. I'm going to turn back to 25. Yeah. That's not out of the realm of possibility. Things that I've seen is the data on meaning and purpose. If you look at, if we cured heart disease and cancer from the face of the planet, we might extend life by 5 to 7 years. Like if we got rid of all of it from everywhere, yes. and these are the number 1 and 2 killers. Yes. If you have meaning and purpose in life, your life extension is 7 years. Yeah. If you play tennis, it's 7 years too. But I mean, I most of my friends are now in their 30s and 40s, and I do all the same things they do. Sure. It's bomb down the mountain at stupid miles an hour. Ride my bike. I feel like it's really an idea. The concept of slowing down, of aging's idea. Now things happen. Like I've had back injuries and I have more little aches and pains. But I've used regenerative medicine to help me deal with those, which we can talk about. And I think for me, I feel like I'm just beginning my life. I mean, honestly, Peter, I feel like I'm 63 and I finally figured my shit out. I figured out what it takes to be happy. I'm like kind of not struggling and suffering and figuring out how to love properly. I think, Thomas Kuhn talked about this whole idea of normal science, which is in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And he talked about this term, the paradigm shift, and how hard it is to change paradigms from Newtonian physics to quantum physics, from, kind of creation theory to, evolution, from, Galileo saying, hey guys, the earth is not the center of the universe, and got put in jail for that. It's really tough to change all ideas. And then, my daughter's in medical school now, and they're learning good stuff, but it's like the old paradigm of disease-based paradigm. And now with these hallmarks, it's an opportunity to go, wait a minute, this whole framework of disease is wrong. We cannot be studying diseases. We need to be studying mechanisms and causes, and then we need to be working on those. Because if we're just dealing with the downstream effects of all these causes that we can do think about, we're just like people are, let's find the drug for Alzheimer's. Good luck with that. Let's find the drug to cure heart disease. Good luck with that. We're better managing it. We're maybe reducing deaths. We're having better treatments. I mean, look at this whole treatment for diabetes with Ozempic. It's just makes me so crazy, Peter. Like, yes, these GLP-1 agonists are helpful, and if you help you lose weight and help if you're a really advanced diabetic. But I can take someone who's got a hemoglobin A1C of 11 and in 6 weeks get them to 5 with no drugs, with food. If that's the best treatment, we should be using it. So metformin is a drug that was found in 1957. It's been used for diabetes forever. It helps with improving insulin sensitivity. It has some side effects, some GI side effects, which sometimes are temporary, but also has some long-term mitochondrial issues. There's a large trial going on called the TAME trial, targeting aging with metformin. And the idea is that if we can use this drug to optimize the AMPK function, AMPK, when it's properly activated, will induce autophagy, will help with DNA repair, will stimulate sirtuins, will cause the improvement in glucose regulation, all these things we want to happen with aging. But does that mean it's the right treatment? But is it better than lifestyle? I don't think so, and here's why. There was a big trial, and it's hard to do randomized controlled trials in medicine and people with large amounts of people with lifestyle. It's just hard. But they did this trial called the Diabetes Prevention Trial, back in the 90s when the food pyramid was big and we were told to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, and pasta a day. And that was the best diet, which is a low-fat diet. So it was not the optimized diet for diabetes. But they took these pre-diabetics and they basically said, okay, you're going to get lifestyle or you're going to get metformin or you're going to get nothing. So nothing, basically was whatever. And then metformin reduced the risk to progression of diabetes by 31%. Lifestyle was 58%.
Yeah.
And that was, in my view, the wrong diet. And so if a crappy diet would work better than this drug, shouldn't we be like doubling down on the sugar stuff and the lifestyle stuff?
Yeah, for sure.
Because is it going to add, if you optimize your insulin levels under 2 and you're exercising and you're low on the carbohydrates and stuff, is metformin going to create added value? I don't know. My gut feeling is no. And so that's one I'm on a respectful pause with, and I don't recommend it. I'm waiting to hear what the TAME trial says, but I kind of have a more of a bias against it because of some of this data. And I think it's just showing how when we overstimulate all of these pathways that are longevity switches by food, our bodies don't like it, and it needs a break. So yes, whether you do fasting week diet or whether you don't eat for 24 hours once a week, or you do a 3-day fast once a quarter. Like there's lots of ways to do it, but the easiest way is just to, have something called breakfast, which means you're breaking your fast, which means you don't eat for 12 to 14 hours every night. That's just a no-brainer for everybody. And I think in terms of, the amount, I don't think we should be overeating for sure. And I think we need to be, lean and muscular is the best strategy for longevity. And if you're gaining belly fat, that's the death knell. So rapamycin is, this compound that was found in Rapa Nui, the Easter Island, and basically in the 60s, these scientists went and they scraped the stuff off the back of one of the statues that were delivered by aliens, and they found, maybe this is going to be a good drug compound. And it was kind of a shitty antifungal, and then they found it maybe has some immune modulating properties. So it's been used in transplant medicine. It's not an immune suppressive, but it does have benefits in reducing inflammation. And then people started researching around longevity and finding that it inhibits mTOR. In fact, this pathway mTOR, which already talks about longevity, means mammalian target of rapamycin. Yes. So literally it's named after this drug from Rapa Nui.
It's hilarious.
It's great. And I think, the animal studies are very promising. The mechanism is really interesting. So instead of calorie restriction, this is a drug that could induce calorie restriction without actually starving yourself. So it induces the benefits like autophagy. So I think taking it at night, there's different people experimenting with it. I just talked to Deepak Chopra. He takes, 6 milligrams once a week. There's people who take it 2 milligrams 3 times a week for 5 weeks, 8 weeks off. There's a million different regimens. We're all guessing. There's some interesting early data on certain therapies that can induce stem cell production, whether it's hyperbaric oxygen therapy or ozone therapy. So there are exogenous treatments that, without getting a stem cell transplant, which is stupidly expensive, you could actually stimulate your own. And there may be more and more data on how we do that through lifestyle. And I think there's some really interesting things around how we can make that happen. I do think that there are intermediate steps like exosomes, which may be the active components in stem cells that are much cheaper, that are easily available. You don't have to suck your bone marrow out of your fat cells, and you don't have to go to Panama. The exosomes are interesting. I've had a few experiences with exosomes. One was I had colitis from getting C. diff, which is caused by a bacteria that I got after taking an antibiotic for a root canal. It was bad, and I was a mess. And then I got C. diff, and then I got severe ulcerative colitis afterwards. And through my usual tricks weren't working, and then I tried exosomes. Are you okay? And exosomes, it's great because you can basically take the placenta, you make sure it's all clean, no disease or anything, and you can culture the lab, and you can grow the stem cells in there, and then you can extract the exosomes, and you can get billions and billions and billions. There's no limit to the amount you can get. Another thing I had with exosomes was when I had a back issue, I had back surgery that went bad, and I was having tons of inflammation in my spine because I had bleeding in my spine. Bad news. And my friend Matt Cook injected 30 cc's of exosomes right up my spinal cord. Yes. And it was amazing. The pain went away immediately. And then I had COVID. And these, of course, these are all anecdotal, and I've used these with patients as well and seen results. And I had severe brain fog, depression. I don't get depressed. I'm like, wow, now I get why people get depressed. Like, I had depression in my time from like divorce or things like that, but like I just felt like physiologically depressed and inflamed, and COVID affects the brain and causes tons of inflammation in the brain. And so I kind of got a shipment to my house and I gave myself an IV because I'm a doctor. And it was like, boom, the lights turned on and my brain fog went away. My brain came back. So I think they have a real value. And I mean, I had back pain for 30 years after surgery when I was 30. And, Matt put all this stuff in my placental matrix with healing factors and exosomes. And I'm like sitting here really with no pain, which I couldn't even sit before without being uncomfortable. I managed it. I just dealt with it. I massaged, I yogaed and everything. But it's like now I was sort of shocked to believe that this field of regenerative medicine has these solutions that, most orthopedic doctors don't know about or scoff at. But I was told I needed back surgery. So, but there's this bunch of studies that were done on animals that are called parabiosis. And essentially what they did was they took old mice and young mice and they kind of wired their circulations together and they watched what happened. And the old mice became young.
And the young mice became old.
Yeah. So the question was, what was it? Was it the old mice's blood that was bad, that was, they were giving to the young? Like, well, what was going on? So they kind of reverse engineered the study a little bit. And they found that if they just did plasma cleaning of the old mice, that they would get the same longevity benefits. Now, plasmapheresis is a medical treatment that's been around for a long, long time. It's used in autoimmune diseases. It's used in various neurologic conditions. It's really a well-established medical treatment. But it's being explored as a longevity therapy and can be done in ways that aren't as aggressive. Like you don't have to take your whole plasma out, but you can take a liter or two out. And essentially the idea is you're filtering your blood. You're filtering out all these old proteins and all these inflammatory compounds and who knows what else is in there. I had COVID second time and it was kind of rougher than the first. And I had a terrible post-COVID syndrome of like arthritis. So I developed, my hand blew up and I was really swollen and painful. I couldn't make a fist and I felt like crap. Again, I went to see Matt Cook and he got this plasmapheresis and they ozonated the blood when it went in.
Yeah. And
literally the next day I was good as new. My hand was normal. I had full energy and I went and I'm like, God, this stuff is amazing. So I mean, honestly, if I had my perfect world, I'd get like a plasmapheresis once a month. I do ozone every month. I do hyperbarics once a year for 30, 40 treatments. I mean, what they did was they took people who were about, I think it was 60 people or so. They gave them, 60 to 90 minute treatment at about 2 atmospheres. But basically the idea is you go in this pressure chamber that they use for scuba divers who, come up too fast, and it hyperoxygenates your tissues. Now it's being used in wound repair. People can't heal a wound, or diabetic ulcers, strokes.
Yeah.
And I've had incredible results with stroke patients, although it's not really approved for that, but it's being researched, used for autism, for Alzheimer's, for all kinds of stuff. Lyme disease. And when you hyperoxygenate the body and you do it under pressure, it seems to be very healing for a lot of things. And so what they did was they measured telomeres and they measured zombie cells. And it had a bigger impact on lengthening telomeres and killing zombie cells than any other known treatment. So I think it's very promising because in our minds, we think antioxidants, health, longevity, oxidation, bad, right? And I think it depends and how much and when and with what. So yes, you're getting potentially an increase in oxidative stress, but your body, in order to heal stuff and kill stuff, has its own oxidative stress mechanisms. When your white blood cells want to kill something, they make hydrogen peroxide, yes. They make ozone, and they literally, these help us stay healthy and young and kill all kinds of infections. So infections are really not happy about the high oxygen, and a lot of low-grade infections we can have that create chronic inflammation, whether viruses or whether it's HSV1, which is herpes in the brain for dementia. So I think there's something about the infection rate. I also think that the dose and the length of time matters, right? If you're at 100% oxygen for a long time, it's super dangerous. Yeah. But if you have a pulsed amount for a short time, it kicks in the body's own healing system. And I wanted to talk about hormesis. We have a few minutes left, but I think these are hormetic therapies. So basically, the idea of hormesis is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so when we now live in this perfectly regulated environment. It's 68 degrees. We never have to deal with any stresses. We always have food. And so we're not starving. We don't have to use our bodies, which is a stress. We don't have to run from tigers anymore. The truth is, as human beings, we are learned to live in tough environments, and we have great systems for dealing with that. So hormesis is like cold therapy, or saunas, or cold plunges, or ozone, or hyperbaric oxygen, or exercise, or calorie restriction, or time-restricted eating. These are all different forms of hormesis, low oxygen states, hypoxia states, which are really a whole other interesting therapy for longevity. And so we have all these potential tools to use, and I try to incorporate them as much as I can. Exercise, obviously, time-restricted eating is easy. I do hot and cold therapies whenever I can. I did hot yoga yesterday, and it was like, but I think these Wim Hof does these whole training programs, and a lot, breath work. These are different kinds of hormetic therapies, and we can induce these in our modern lifestyle in a way that activate these ancient healing systems. So at the bottom line, the message here is that we're doing everything to screw up our ancient healing systems. There's so much we can do to activate our body's own innate healing, longevity, repair, and healing systems. I take fisetin, I take quercetin, I take extract of Himalayan buckwheat, which has all 132 different phytochemicals and bioflavonoids, quercetin, rutin, asparagine. The truth is, the 80-20 on this is stuff that is free, accessible. It's literally understanding how your bodies were designed and working with them, and basically getting rid of the bad stuff, putting in the good stuff. And that's really why I wrote Young Forever, was a roadmap. It's not, deep dives into all the science, although the science is there. It's really about taking the science and creating an interpretive map for people to design their lives and include what they like and leave what they don't, but build these practices on a daily level that keep you feeling better and younger longer. I mean, my goal is to die young as late as possible. I think the key thing to remember is that it's not that hard. That based on the science we have now, we understand the basic causes of disease and aging. We understand the basic ingredients for health, the science of creating health, and that Young Forever is simply a roadmap that guides you through how your body works that you were never given. It's like the owner's manual. And, it's like, your car, you don't know all the features. You don't have to use all the things, but the basic stuff to get around, navigate, and do what you got to do, you got to learn how to do. And it maps out what to eat, how to exercise, how to hack your sleep, how to discharge stress, how to deal with trauma, what the latest and most sort of useful nutraceuticals are and supplements are, what's coming down the pike, the hormesis therapies that are easy to use. So it's really a practical user's guide.
And that's Dr. Mark Hyman talking about his latest book called Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life, which is a roadmap to a long, healthy life, and it's available on Amazon. Bye for now.